After the Great War, the survivors of Appalachia formed the factions which would struggle to rebuild, defend, or pillage. The Enclave plotted to finish the war with China from its bunker below the White Spring, while the Free Staters looked forward to a future without government interference. The Responders, a group of police, firefighters, doctors, and citizen volunteers, banded together to help those in need and bring order from chaos. David Thorpe and his raider gangs became the scourge of the region, taking what they wanted from whomever they wanted, building a kingdom for themselves in the Savage Divide. And Taggarty's Thunder joined the Brotherhood of Steel to find and safeguard technology for the future. None of them were prepared for what came next. This special Fallout 76 Modus File podcast miniseries will follow each of these factions in their final days and hours, and reveal the stories of the Last Days of Appalachia. There had been a time when the factions of Appalachia might have worked together to defeat the Scorched. Each one had a piece of the puzzle, but infighting and mutual distrust doomed them all. In one Free State's bunker, Abigayle Singh tried to single-handedly turn the tide, and left a message of hope for the future. But in the end, Abbie grabs her pack and leaves the safety of her bunker for the unknown. She steps into a world overrun by the monsters, perhaps one of the last people in Appalachia. Where is she going? And what happened to her? We follow in Abigayle's footsteps in our final installment of our Fallout 76 podcast miniseries, The Last Days of Appalachia, Abbie's Lament. The interior of the old bunker was quiet. The near silence was only broken by the sound of the steady tapping on a terminal keyboard and the hum of the fusion generator. The kitchen area was clean, with neat stacks of plates and a few leftover supplies on the countertops, while the table and nearby desk were covered with plans and schematics, held down by an old Harper's Ferry souvenir coffee mug. Shelves in the back of the room were filled with old transistors, batteries, and half-repaired computer equipment, leftover projects which got shelved as priorities changed from tinkering to survival to finally laying the groundwork for others to finish the work which had been started years before. In the other corner, in front of a bank of computers, Abigayle Singh, the last surviving member of the Free States, was triple-checking her carefully recorded terminal entries, her final contribution to the war against the Scorched.
Well, that last section works fine. I hope whoever finds this doesn't mind the grind. Not like I have that much of a say in the matter, though, right?
Abbie had tied her hair into a short ponytail to keep it out of her face as she concentrated on making sure her step-by-step instructions were clear as they could be, and that they'd kick off at the proper intervals, should any survivors carry on her work.
Oh, okay, Abbie. You know you're just doing this to delay the inevitable, right?
Abbie had been working on this plan for a long time, and she had the stacks of discarded holotapes with mistakes, goofs, gaffes, and corrupted data to prove it. But everything had been validated, double-checked, and validated again, and to the best of her abilities. As soon as someone tripped the terminal upstairs, her program would kick off. She could only hope that someday, a person, a real live human being, would come knocking at her door, and that person would be smart enough, good enough, and dedicated enough to follow her instructions and finish the Scorched detection system that she could not. Not that she'd given up all hope, but she hadn't seen another person in God knows how long. The radio was just a steady hiss of static, and none of the other bunkers were responding. Abbie thought back to how she got here. Right before the war, her father and friends had taken them all from their homes and moved them into these bunkers. She'd been young back then, and the whole Free States thing didn't mean a whole lot to her. They had lost their mom already. Abbie missed her a lot, especially when the family was alone in the bunker. At least Calvin had Daniel to play with. All she had was her electronics, and, well, Dax. As much as she regretted it now, she hated Calvin after Dax disappeared. He never admitted what happened, but she blamed him nonetheless. Later, of course, none of that mattered, and Abbie would have given anything for just one more moment with her brother. She finished up on the terminal, loading the final holotape message, and then went back to the storeroom to grab the last of the supplies she might need. Her dad had made sure they had food, water, and other supplies for years. When Raleigh gave the all-clear, they were even able to trade with the other bunkers for anything else they might have needed. Now, of course, there wasn't much left. Oh, sure, it was enough for her for even another couple of years, if she wanted. But she no longer had any desire to stay in what now felt like a tomb to her. Abbie grabbed a couple of cans of leftover cram, 3 bottles of purified water, and a set of circuit boards she might need, if she ever managed to find that damn uplink.
Madigan, where did you go?
Madigan had been a former member of the Brotherhood of Steel, turned responder. When he had shown up at their door looking for help, her dad and Raleigh had wanted to run him right out of the mire. Sure, the Brotherhood said they weren't the military, but to the Free States, it didn't make a difference. Didn't help either when they came in like jackbooted thugs demanding supplies and weapons in the name of defending Appalachia. Abbie could see that Madigan was different. He told them what was happening down south, that the Brotherhood was gone and the Scorched were on the move. It took a lot of convincing, but they finally all agreed to cooperate. They had given him their last uplink, and Madigan was going to try to get it to the top of the world. There was a transmitter up there that would be perfect to get the Scorched detection system operational, and Madigan said he could get the responders to send help too.
Except that didn't happen.
They had lost contact with the responders somewhere south of Berkeley Springs, though they might have gotten a snippet from him sometime later, but the transmission had been garbled. Abbie hadn't given up hope, and that hope was infectious. Calvin and the few remaining Free Staters all went out to install the rest of the system, plus put out the lures they'd developed with old Brotherhood tech to try to get a leg up on the Scorched piece. She'd stay behind to manage the project, and they had only spotty radio communication. The last message from Calvin was from North Watoga. They were trying to set up a lure before heading further south to get the final section of the SDS installed. One by one, each radio went silent. She'd gone out back and made a little memorial. It was right next to where she and Calvin had buried their father, and near where she had put together a small headstone for Dax too. It wasn't much, but at least it was something to help her remember what she had before, and why she was just not going to lay down and die, but fight right up until the end. Stuffing the last few supplies into her pack, Abbie walked back out to her bedroom. She tried to keep the memories from flooding back, of better times, before the fall of Harper's, her dad passing, and all the rest. Her traveling outfit was laid out on the bed. A few pieces of leather armor, an old hunter's long coat, and her dad's old black cowboy hat. She used to make fun of him when he wore it, but now it seemed fitting to get something of him with her. Maybe it would be her good luck charm.
Can't put this off any longer, Abbie. It's time to go.
She changed, slipping the coat on over her traveling clothes and armor before putting on an old pair of boots. When she was done, she looked at herself in the mirror. Her hair was a mess again, so she tried to stuff more of it under the hat. The coat had been patched over the years, but it felt good and would keep her warm, hopefully. And the hat? Well, she still thought it looked ridiculous. But Abbie also hoped that if her dad was watching over her, that it would make him proud to see her wear it. The pack and the bedroll were next to her father's old terminal in the kitchen along with her rifle. It had been Calvin's, since Abbie didn't spend much time outside. However, her dad insisted that she know how to shoot anyway.
Oh, Dad. The first time I picked this up, it was nearly as big as I'd been. Almost knocked me on my behind when I pulled the trigger for the first time. But you were there to keep me from falling, weren't you?
The old rifle had a funny story behind it, too. Her dad had traded some electrical parts for it down at the Harper's Ferry market. It didn't look like a standard combat rifle. It had a built-in silencer, and the trader swore that it made you quieter when you used it. Bullshit was the first thing her father said to the guy. When he asked where he found it, the trader claimed he got it off some corpse in the ash heap. Looked like a government guy or something, around these weird pylon things. Well, her dad drove a hard bargain, and the trader really wanted those parts, so they did the deal. Afterwards, he even named the rifle, calling it his problem solver. Well, that was a bit of a family joke, since her father rarely ever used it anyway. Because of the lack of ammunition around, Calvin had it rechambered to fire .38, which is much more common around in the Free States arsenal. Abbie's smile turned back to a frown when she realized it really was time to go. The generator would keep everything powered for the foreseeable future, and she'd lock things up tight when she left. Last she checked, Scorched couldn't work terminals, so everything should stay as she left it. She picked up her pack, slung it over her shoulder. Looking around, she said a silent prayer for the dead, and another for the living, and then one for herself. When the door closed behind her, there was no going back. Abbie checked the outside terminal and confirmed it was in standby status. The moment someone tried to unlock the door, her first message would play, and then the future was in their hands.
Okay, you old terminal. It's your job now. So don't you go breaking on me. Deal?
She put her hand on the old terminal, just like she used to pat Dax. And with that, she turned and gazed off into the mire. Abbie could see the old road twisting off to the north to the top of the Savage Divide, and then also heading south, deeper into the mire before ending somewhere down in the cranberry bog. The forests and swamps of the mire will make for rough travel, though she didn't like the idea of being out in the open road either. As far as where she was going, Abbie decided to follow in Madigan's footsteps and see if she could find the uplink, and then maybe get it to the top of the world. It might have been a fool's errand, but it was the only thing that she could think to do. There might still be raiders up there. And of course, Rose. Better than nothing, though, and if there were still people out there too, her journey might just be worth it. Abbie still had her old map, updated from time to time when free staters or merchants would bring bits of news of changes, new settlements, destroyed settlements, new threats, or whatnot. But every journey started by just putting one foot in front of the other.
How does the song Country Roads begin? Almost heaven, West Virginia, right? A lot has changed in Appalachia since the Scorched plague, and it is far from heaven now. Far from Heaven, a Fallout 76 story, is a rich and immersive audio drama based upon the popular video game. With strong storytelling and fascinating characters from across many familiar factions, Far From Heaven is a podcast fans of the video game will love. Available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google, Amazon, and many other great podcasting platforms. Far From Heaven, a Fallout 76 story, available now.
The mire had gotten so much worse since the days when Abbie lived in Harper's Ferry. Whatever had changed the region had brought the strangler vines and other creatures into their midst, hadn't stopped. Maybe it was the radioactivity or even something to do with the Scorched, but she'd seen things that chilled her right to the bone. It was also the weather, too. Soon after leaving, the heavens opened up and it had been raining across the mire for days. The long coat helped keep her dry, to a point, but she'd been forced to find shelter against the worst of it. Torrential downpours that limited visibility to just a few yards in any direction. Abbie had spent 2 days in a small cave just trying to get a little drier. She couldn't light a fire since everything was damp, but with her formidable technical skills, she had the forethought to bring along a small, battery-powered heater. It was certainly better than nothing, and then there were times outside where she could hear creatures scurrying around. Probably small ones, but a time or two they sounded pretty large, even vibrating the walls of the cave as they passed. When the rain finally stopped, she was still just north of Berkeley Springs. Abbie had known some of the folks there who made it down to Harper's after raiders trashed the town and killed anyone who resisted. As far as she knew, the town was probably still full of raiders, or probably worse, Scorched. She didn't have a lot of options to get around the town. The hills to the north were too steep to climb, and below the town was nothing but swamps now, made worse by all the rain. Instead, she tried to skirt the center of town past the old train station south. The Sunday brothers, friends of hers from Harper's Ferry, had a cabin there with their own bunker. Abbie hadn't seen or spoken to them in years, but maybe they were still there.
Well, that's quite a bit of wishful thinking.
She was most of her way through the wreckage of Berkeley when she saw her first Scorched. Even worse, it was wearing a torn Free States jumpsuit. Hiding behind an old police car, she watched as it shambled past, hissing and mumbling. Abbie pressed herself against the door of the car, trying to be as quiet as possible. Holding her breath, she waited until she couldn't hear the hissing anymore and looked around the side of the car. The street was clear, and Abbie took the chance to dash over to a nearby house. The front door was open, and she ducked inside. The next few hours were spent sneaking down side streets and through empty houses to avoid the wandering Scorched. Abbie was distressed by the numbers she saw, even more so by the clothing. It was Free States, raiders, regular folk, and she swears she saw one wearing an old Brotherhood uniform, too. It was also the statue people that unnerved her as well. She nearly ran into one of them near the old pharmacy. At first she thought it was another Scorched, but when it didn't move, she got closer to get a better look. Her Geiger counter started to tick when she got within a few feet of it. The figure was shaped like a person, but it looked like stone. Stone covered in glowing green veins and some crystals growing out of it as well.
Whoa. I've never seen anything like this before.
Abbie was an expert in electronics, but she'd also had to learn a lot about the Scorched too. Abbie knew that sometimes the Scorched would stop moving and just stand perfectly still until something woke them up.
Maybe if they didn't wake up, this is what would happen to them?
She filed that information away, along with the rest, then reached out to touch it. Abbie rested her hand on its shoulder. It was still warm to the touch, and she probably needed to take some rat away afterwards if the Geiger counter was right. A moment later, she jerked her hand away as the figure collapsed on itself, leaving nothing but a radioactive pile of dust on the road. The full realization that this thing had once been a person and was now nothing but a pile in front of her, that everyone she knew who had been infected, or might have, would end up like this.
No. No, no, no.
Abbie nearly cried out, but brought her hand to her mouth and tried to blink away the tears. But she could run, and run she did. Before she knew it, she found herself sobbing on the platform at the Berkeley Springs Railroad Station. She had cried over her father's grave, and when she lost Dak, and last when Calvin stopped answering her radio calls. But now she felt the weight of the world on her shoulders, and it hurt. Trying to pull herself back together, she leaned up against the side of the station, and then she heard the gunshots. The staccato sound of an automatic rifle was followed by pistol fire coming from the south in the direction of the Sunday brothers' cabin. Picking up her rifle, Abbie jogged in the direction of the shots, glancing behind from time to time to make sure she wasn't dragging Scorched from Berkeley Springs. The gunfire continued uninterrupted, and she arrived at the footpath leading down to the cabin. Abbie unslung her rifle and crawled up towards a rock outcrop overlooking the property. When she peered over the edge, she saw a group of 5 or 6 Scorched surrounding the cabin, firing up towards the second story. On the balcony, Abbie could see at least one person firing down on the Scorched, ducking and weaving as the creature fired back. Beyond that, she couldn't tell if there was anyone else, but she had to help. Bringing the rifle forward, she adjusted the sights and centered on the body of one of the Scorched. Just like her father taught her, she would aim for center mass. Taking a deep breath, then exhaling slowly, she pulled the trigger. The built-in suppressor muffled the shot, which would have been hard to hear over the other gunfire, but in this case the Scorched never knew what hit it, and it fell to the ground.
One down.
Abbie fired again and again and again, finally killing all of the Scorched, having only missed once. She looked back up and no longer saw anyone on the balcony. She hoped whoever it was realized they had help, but she also just didn't want to barge in. That would be a great way to get herself shot. Instead, she carefully reloaded the rifle before slowly climbing down the rocks towards the front of the cabin. Although she'd never visited, the Sunday brothers told her all about it back at Harper's, so she at least had a rough idea of the layout. When Abbie got closer, she could see where the Scorched fell. Each one lay crumpled on the ground, and the blood was a mixture of red with green, staining the area around them.
Ugh. Smells like a few rotten eggs in here.
Within sight of the doorway, Abbie raised her rifle into the air, making sure it was pointed away from the cabin.
Hey in there. Name's Abbie. I'm just a regular old person. Can I come in? And can you not kill me, please?
There was no response from the cabin.
Anyone home? Hey, I killed those Scorched for you. I'm going to come in now. Don't shoot.
Walking up to the door, she tried the handle and the door swung open. Abbie looked inside. There was a small bar to her left and furniture scattered around the first floor.
Hello? Anyone here?
She looked up the stairs towards the second floor and saw the first body. Not so much the whole body, but an arm at the top of the stairs. Abbie brought the rifle down again and started up. She listened closely and thought she heard something, so she called again, but no response. As she went up the stairs, she could now see the body the arm belonged to. It was a young woman, dressed in a tattered fireman's coat, definitely dead. When Abbie got to the top, she could see 2 other bodies, another woman and a man. Both of them looked to have been firing out the windows and had been shot. Spinning around, Abbie found another young man, dressed like a firefighter too, slumped against the doorway to the balcony. He was cradling a rifle in his lap and holding his hand against his stomach.
Hey there, buddy.
Abbie slung her rifle over her shoulder and walked slowly over to the wounded man. His eyes open, scared at first. but when he saw she wasn't a Scorched, he tried to speak.
Shh, it's okay. Don't talk. Let me see if I can help you. Oh, boy. That really doesn't look good.
Abbie put down her rifle and pack, looking for her first aid kit. She didn't have any stim packs. They had been in short supply, and she'd given the last of them to Calvin when he'd left to go down south. But she did have plenty of healing salve. It was a special mixture of herbs from the mire, and in a pinch, they worked pretty well as a substitute. She gingerly applied it to the man's stomach and then tried to get a dressing together as best she could. Abbie remembered the medical training she had gotten and hated back at Harper's, but she did her best. She had to rip down one of the old curtains upstairs for more cloth to tie around the man's body to hold everything in place.
I'm really sorry, but I need to move you. I think there's a bunker downstairs, and it's probably the best place for us. Can you walk?
The man looked at her through pained eyes and just nodded. He wasn't completely dead weight, but getting him on his feet was hard. It was obvious that he was in immense pain, but once he got him moving, they made it downstairs together. Abbie had to check the wound again, and even with the salve, it was still bleeding. Adjusting the dressing, tighter this time, she took his arm and threw it over her shoulder. It was a good thing that he was relatively thin, otherwise there was no way she could get him down the rest of the stairs. Abbie could hear him gritting his teeth as they walked, and she could only imagine the pain that he was probably in. At the bottom of the stairs to the basement, the bunker door was locked. Lucky for both of them, Abbie knew a thing or two about picking locks. She laid down her patient in the corner and took out a bobby pin and a screwdriver. The bunker itself looked like it hadn't been used in years.
Where the heck are the Sunday brothers?
She went back to the man and helped him up. He was just barely hanging on, and she needed to get him onto a bed, just so that she could get a better look at the wound and stabilize him. There were several cots along the wall, so Abbie brought him over to one and laid him down.
Sorry again, but this is probably gonna hurt. A lot.
She was about halfway through when she realized her patient had passed out. She was scared at first that maybe he died, but when she checked his pulse, it was still there, just very weak. After removing the dressing, Abbie lifted up his shirt. It was even worse than she thought. The salve had helped, but the bullet appeared to have hit some vital organs. Without an actual operating room or even just a doctor, she didn't know how much she could do to help. Over the course of the next hour, she used every bit of medical knowledge she'd pick up, almost all the supplies she had or could find in the bunker, and even a pair of old pliers to finally pull out the bullet that had lodged in the man's gut. Wiping the sweat from her brow, Abbie did the best she could to sew up the wound and dress it again, with a clean cloth this time, and injected a couple of doses of antibiotics too, just in case. She leaned back in the folding chair next to the bed and sighed. It was just her luck to have run into the first real person she'd seen in nearly forever, and he was probably going to die before she could find out his name. She took his pulse again. It might have been just a little stronger this time. Abbie got up and did a full inventory of the bunker. The Sunday brothers had been well prepared by the looks of it. She found a lot of old canned food, some purified water, and other items that would probably be of use to her.
What the heck is this? Vegetarian ham? Oh well, I guess beggars can't be choosers. Right, Abbie?
She opened the top and turned the can over, watching whatever it was slide out and drop onto the plate.
Oh, yummy. A block of something.
After eating, she got some of the water in a small cup and went back to the bed. The man was moaning a bit, but still unconscious. She lifted the glass to his lips and gave him just a little. Abbie repeated this for the next several hours until she was too tired to stand. Taking off her own coat, she lay down on the cot opposite the patient and was asleep almost as her head hit the pillow. Her eyes sprung open and she nearly left off the bed. She was at the man's side in a moment, afraid that she had arrived to catch the man's last breath. Instead, he was looking up at her, very much alive.
Who the heck are you?
Oh, thank God. I'm Abbie. Abbie Singh. And who are you?
Taylor Johnson. Fire breather.
A fire breather. They were responders. Like expert soldiers or something.
Where are the others?
Oh, the other people he was with. Taylor, I'm sorry. They didn't make it.
Damn. Damn. Damn.
You guys were pretty far from home. What were you doing out here?
We were running. Our group couldn't make it to the river. Got cut off. Jamie said we'd be better off heading east.
Running? I'm sorry, I don't understand.
It's over. We lost.
Wait, what are you talking about? Where are the responders?
The responders, all gone. The Scorched came, overran the airport. We lost a lot of good people. Survivors were heading to the river. Heard Point Pleasant maybe, but who knows? Us, well, we lost our CO to one of those damn Scorched beasts. A few others ran out on us. They didn't get too far. Ugh.
Abbie got up to get him some more water and one of the last painkillers she still had.
Okay, but Taylor, I'm working on something. Something that just might help us get rid of the Scorched.
Lady, you don't understand. There ain't anyone left to save. You're looking at the last fire breather left alive. And there isn't anyone left on our side of Appalachia. Not anymore. And my team, we walked straight through Raider country. They're all dead too, or turned into Scorched, or worse. So unless you got people up your way, we just might be the last two people left in all of Appalachia.
Abbie didn't know how to react. As bad as things were, she just always expected there'd be somebody else out there. The responders were the best of them. Despite what happened at Harper's and how the others thought about them, Abbie had trusted them, believed in them.
You said you came through the Savage Divide, right?
Ow! Yeah, we did.
I'm looking for something. And someone. And the last place I knew they were headed was top of the world. Do you know Frank Madigan?
Madigan? Yeah. He and I served together. But he's been gone for a while. I don't think any of us have heard from him in years, maybe.
Abbie frowned. Taylor was coughing up blood, and the news of Madigan meant he never made it back. She dabbed the sides of Taylor's mouth again and went back to get more water. He died later that day. Going through his pack, Abbie felt like she was violating his privacy, but she was short on supplies herself. Taylor had kept a journal, a ragged old book with entries that went back over a decade. He certainly didn't have the best handwriting, but she was able to glean more about what happened over on the other side of Appalachia. The responders had really given it a go, even after the Christmas flood. From the journal, it sounded like Morgantown Airport had grown into a fairly substantial settlement. The entries changed after 2096. The Scorched were everywhere, and then he talked about the fall of the airport, and Taylor and his men being cut off and forced to flee to the east. They heard one last call for people to get to Point Pleasant. Taylor thought they might be trying to get over the Ohio and out of Appalachia, but there were just too many other Scorched around, and as soon as the Scorched beasts follow, it would have been all over anyway. The rest of the journal talked about their journey through the Divide. The Scorched infested every Raider camp and outpost they found. Good old Rose was still broadcasting from top of the world, but they never saw another living soul. Taylor lost half his group when they were set upon by 3 Scorched beasts around Seneca Rocks. The rest only survived by hiding in an old cave near the Devil's Backbone. As grim as things were, he pushed his men on, hoping to find a way out of Appalachia. Abbie set the journal down on a small table next to the cot. For the first time that she could remember, she no longer had a plan. She might be the last person left alive in all of Appalachia. And getting to the top of the world sounded like suicide, with no guarantee that she'd find anything at all. She could at least bury Taylor and his friends. They had traveled so far, and their journey ended here. Abbie was able to fashion crude crosses made of scrap wood and scrawled their names on each. Back in the cabin, Abbie cleaned up as much as she could, more out of habit than anything else. That's when she found the notes in the holotapes that Jesus Sunday left. After listening to the last holotape she found out back, she sat down next to the terminal and cried. Tears for Jesus, tears for Juan, even tears for Brianna Hawk. She felt as though she carried the sins of Appalachia with her, and they weighed heavily on her heart. A lesser person would have given up, but for Abbie it gave her even more resolve. She'd check on those parts of the Scorched detection system she could reach, ensure that whomever followed, and she was sure someone would, could finish what she started. After that, well, there was an old saying her father once told her, "You can never go home again." It hadn't made a lot of sense at the time, but now, to Abbie, it meant that she should try to live, to survive, but that her time in Appalachia was over.
It didn't have to end this way. But we all failed. The Brotherhood, the Raiders, the Responders, even the Free States. Instead of finding a way to live together, we all died alone. If anyone comes after us, I pray they can find a way to work together and live in peace.
Abbie collected what she could from the cabin and left at dawn the next morning. The first SDS unit she found near Harper's was still reasonably intact. It might require minor repairs, but nothing that the average person wouldn't be able to handle. She had to give the rest of Harper's a wide berth. Too many Scorched and other creatures still infested the ruins, although the old armory appeared to be clear and intact, another part of the plan to get the SDS up and running.
Hi, I'm Fire Writer, and I'm the host of The Pixel People, a podcast dedicated to taking a close look at our favorite characters from our favorite video games. From major characters who define the course of a game's storyline to smaller characters who you might have never noticed. Every week, we go beyond the quest line to examine a particular character's story arc and choices, and discover the real-world parallels and life lessons hidden just below the surface. I hope you'll join us. You can find the Pixel People on Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and everywhere else you listen to podcasts.
Over the next several days, Abbie tried to find a way to get across the river. She nearly ran into a group of big green guys, super mutants near the old rest stop south of Harper's. Sneaking around the old garage, she slipped and rolled down the hill towards the water. Hitting some rocks on the way down, Abbie was surprised she hadn't gotten the attention of every creature in the mire. But the wet ground dampened the sound, and although she could hear the mutants talking that they heard something, none of them bothered to check below.
Well, they might be really big, but thank goodness they aren't very bright.
She was covered in mud, but still in one piece. She bruised her side a bit, but otherwise was okay. Checking her rifle and cleaning it the best she could, Abbie slogged down to the river's edge. It was still too deep to ford, but looking down towards the Galleria, it looked like there might be a way across. The closer she got to the Galleria, Abbie could hear Scorched in the parking lot. She would have to hug the water's edge to keep from getting their attention, and besides the tangled roots of the trees and the strangler vines, there was no other cover. Finally, she got to the old dock below the Galleria.
Crud. No boats.
Not that the water was that deep, but she didn't relish wading all the way across.
No choice, I guess.
And she took some tentative steps into the water. It was only knee-deep, and the mud at the bottom wasn't too bad, though if she lost a boot in it, she'd really be in trouble. Unfortunately, the splashing she made as she started walking towards the other shore caught the attention of one of the Scorched above.
Kill all.
Crap.
Abbie picked up the pace, but the going was slow as the water got deeper. She heard more of them coming, joining the growing chorus, and more gunshots too. Lucky for her, they appeared to be lousy shots and most missed by a mile. Abbie was nearly halfway across and could see one of the old Free State bunkers in the cliff face. All she had to do was make it there, and she should be safe. Last she'd been told, the Scorched can't swim, and usually don't follow across water either. There was another volley of gunshots, and Abbie felt the impact of one in her pack.
Whoa, that was too close.
And that's when she heard the buzzing.
Oh no. Blood bugs.
All the commotion had attracted the attention of a small swarm of blood bugs. They were giant mutated mosquitoes, and quite deadly. She ran a few more yards until she reached a large tree. Ducking behind it, she raised her rifle and pointed it down the river. A few wild shots from the Scorched hit the tree she was hiding behind, but her bigger concern were the big insects coming down the river towards her.
Okay, Abbie. Relax, or you won't hit a thing.
Blood bugs were fast, but very fragile. Abbie's first shot shattered the body of one of the bugs. This, however, caused the others to break formation and start coming at her from different angles. She fired 3 more times, but only managed to hit one of the creatures, leaving at least 3 more closing in on her. Knowing it was time to go, Abbie turned and waded back into the water. She needed to get to that bunker, and fast. The buzzing got louder, and she ducked just as one of the bugs flew right past her. The next pulled up short and shot its sharp proboscis at her, tearing into her pack. Turning quickly, she lashed out with the butt of her rifle, smashing the blood plug into the river. The 2 remaining bugs circled back, before darting in again. Abbie was nearly to the opposite bank, the water now just up to her ankles, giving her the ability to run faster when she felt an agonizing pain in her back. A blood bug had landed on her pack and stabbed right through it into her shoulder. The pain nearly bowled her over, and she barely caught herself from falling into the mud. By pure instinct, she threw herself onto the shore and rolled over on her back, crushing the bug into the mud. The buzzing of the last bug got louder, and Abbie looked up to see it trying to settle directly on top of her, pointing its proboscis directly at her chest. Despite the pain, she reached up and grabbed the sharp needle in her hand, cutting herself and then using the other hand to wrestle the blood bug to the ground and kill it. Blood and fluid leaked all over, and Abbie leaned up, reaching around to her back. She nearly screamed when she found the other proboscis still sticking out of her back. She grabbed it and yanked as hard as she could, letting out a muffled cry, and then throwing it into the water. Abbie was seeing stars and felt lightheaded. Rising slowly to her feet, she half-walked, half-stumbled to the bunker door. When she tried the handle, it was open, and she slipped inside before slamming the door behind her. It took all of her strength not to fall onto the floor, and she used her hand on the doorframe to prop herself up. The interior of the bunker was a mess. It obviously hadn't been used in a long time, and the smell of mold and mildew was nearly overwhelming. Nearly falling down the stairs to the lower portion of the bunker, she ended up in the kitchen area much like hers had been. Unfortunately, most of the rest of the level was underwater. Finally collapsing into a chair, Abbie dropped her rifle. She tried to take off her pack to get whatever medical supplies she might have left, but the darkness rushed in, and she found herself falling to the floor and into unconsciousness. Abbie woke up just as she felt herself getting sick. She crawled a few feet before throwing green bile up all over the floor and into the murky water. Nothing felt right. Her skin felt hot and her head hurt, plus the stabbing pain she still felt from the wound in her back.
Damn it, Abbie. Pull yourself together.
Managing to get her pack off, she nearly cried out when she saw that it had been torn open, leaving almost nothing left inside. Most of her food and water, plus medical supplies, were now missing. She picked herself up off the floor, only to throw up again when she got to her feet. After retching a few times, she finally steadied herself and got back to the chair. Her father's cowboy hat lay on the floor next to the rifle, but she didn't dare pick it up until she figured out how badly she'd been injured. Over the next hour, she managed to take off her long coat and undershirt. Her skin didn't look good. It was pasty and warm to the touch. A mirror over the kitchen sink allowed her to see the wound in her back. It looked angry and red, oozing liquid and blood down her back. Abbie only had a small amount of healing salve left, which she used on the wound. She winced in pain as she applied the salve to the wound. She really felt bad, and she knew she needed more medical supplies. She slowly got to her feet and went to explore the rest of the bunker. Abbie wasn't the first person to visit by the looks of it. Most of the scrap and supplies had been taken already, leaving very little for her to find. In one of the back rooms, she could hear the tick of what sounded like a Geiger counter. When she went to investigate, she found the old device left propped up in a corner. It was signaling a constant reading of moderate radioactivity, enough to be dangerous.
That's weird. Why isn't mine registering?
And that's when she looked down and saw that her own Geiger counter was broken.
Oh. It must have broken when I fell down the hill.
Abbie reached down and picked up the other Geiger counter, and it immediately spiked. She looked around to try to find the source of whatever the counter had picked up and what was giving off that much radiation. Abbie didn't see anything out of the ordinary until the realization struck her. Literally.
No, it can't be.
Pointing the counter at herself, she saw the needle spike again, to a level that was definitely fatal. She ran back into the kitchen and tore into her pack, ignoring the searing pain running through her whole body. Radaway.
Where the hell is the Radaway?
Abbie looked everywhere, but her Radaway was gone. She felt sick, both physically and mentally, If she didn't take care of this dose of radiation, she'd be dead within hours.
It's not fair. It can't end like this.
Then she felt a hand on her shoulder and a voice in her ear, seemingly coming from far away, but she could hear every word. "You need to get going, Abigayle." It sounded just like her father, but when she turned around, there was no one. But she felt like he was there, and she focused on that to give her strength. There had to be other places nearby, any place she could find supplies. Barely managing to get her long coat back on, she picked up her hat from the floor and brushed her hair back to put it on. When she looked down at her hand, she saw long strands of her hair between her fingers. It had begun to fall out. With her pack torn, she found another small knapsack amongst the debris and slung it over her good shoulder. Out of options, Abbie returned to the bunker entrance and opened the door, wincing as she put pressure on the wound. Outside of the sounds of other insects and the breeze blowing, she didn't hear anything else. Fighting through the pain and a pounding headache, Abbie started walking down the riverbank to the south, leaving the Galleria and the bunker behind. She strained to put one foot in front of the other, watching the skin on her hand turn malted and brown and starting to slough off. After a few hours, the cliff face ended, and Abbie turned east towards the hills in the distance. Her vision was blurry, and she still felt sick, but there was nothing left for her to throw up. She felt like she was walking through a dream. She saw visions of the past, of her family, even her mother, seemingly willing her to keep moving. When the sun finally set over the hills, Abbie curled up in a hollow tree stump, shivering against the cold even as her skin felt like it was on fire. Her restless sleep was filled with the thoughts of the past and her fear of dying alone. It was only the singular thought of her project, her words and her notes that gave her hope. The next morning, she slowly opened her eyes and saw the sunlight filtering through the cracks in the trunk. Abbie felt so weak, and when she touched her face, the skin felt dry and brittle. And putting her hand on her head, she found that all of her hair was gone too.
Please, Dad. I don't want to die.
She knew enough about radiation poisoning to know that it was just a matter of time, but she didn't just want to give up. Abbie crawled slowly out of her hiding place into the light and slowly rose to her feet. Despite the weakness, she also felt different. Her shoulder didn't hurt as badly, and she no longer felt sick to her stomach, but she also wasn't hungry anymore either. She lost track of how long she had been walking. It might have been hours or even days. She found herself on an incline, heading up into the eastern hills. She got dizzy like she was having a bout of vertigo and leaned against a tree to clear her head and get her bearings again. She had to use her rifle like a cane as the hill got steeper, but she still fell a few times. Her body felt different, her skin, her face, just about everything.
Is this what dying feels like?
By the time she got to the top of the hill, she was out of breath, and her vision was even more blurry. Looking around, Abbie found herself on a small plateau, well hidden by large trees and the shadows of the surrounding hills. At the end, backed up against what must have been a mountain, she could see structures, and smoke was coming from there, rising above the makeshift walls. Abbie tried to crack a smile, but it was hard to make the muscles move. She put her hand over her eyes to try to get a better look. Buildings meant people, and smoke meant live people.
I'm so tired.
Abbie could feel the darkness closing in. Her eyes were getting heavy, but she still kept one foot moving in front of the other. Closer and closer to her goal, Abbie nearly fell to her knees. A little voice in the back of her head was telling her just to lie down, but she pressed on. She'd be damned if she'd give up after everything. If not for her family or the future, it was going to be for her.
Help. Anyone. I need help.
Abbie couldn't take another step forward, but she heard sounds coming from the walls. A wooden gate began to open just as Abbie's vision blurred for the last time. She could see figures now coming towards her. She tried to raise her hand in greeting, but instead she fell to the ground on her knees. Even lifting her head was proving to be a nearly impossible task as her father's cowboy hat slipped from her head into the dirt. Abbie thought she heard someone speak, but before she could comprehend the words, the darkness closed in, and she collapsed onto the ground.
Any idea who she is?
None, but she came from Appalachia, that's for sure.
But it's been years since any of us got out of there.
I know, but...
Abbie slowly opened her eyes, waking in the middle of some conversation which she could only assume was about her. She was laying in a bed, a real one, in a dimly lit room. A small fire was burning in a corner fireplace, and two people were sitting nearby, talking to each other.
It looks like our visitor is awake, Harold.
My. Well, don't just sit there. Let's see to our patient.
Abbie tried to focus, but her eyesight was still a little blurry. She couldn't make out the faces of the people helping her.
Thank you.
Oh, honey. You look like you had a hard go. You're safe now. Probably the safest place for you, too.
The woman had a glass in her hand and came closer.
But you're a ghoul.
Shh. It's okay. We're not feral.
Abbie looked up and saw that the man, called Harold, was a ghoul too.
And by the looks of it, you ain't either.
This last statement totally confused Abbie. Ghouls? All ghouls were ferals, crazy and dangerous. That's what she'd always been told. And her? She was no ghoul. She tried to speak, but she was still so tired, and it was so hard to form the words.
Oh, honey. You don't know, do you?
No, what?
The ghoul got up and snagged a small handheld mirror from the table.
I don't know any other way, and I'm sorry, but like I said, you're safe now.
She put the mirror in front of Abbie, and the reflection was that of a ghoul. It was all just too much, and Abbie passed out again.
Lordy, look what you did to that poor girl.
Better she knows. If this had happened to her a decade ago, they'd just have hunted her down and killed her, like they did with just about all the rest of us.
All right then. When she wakes up, I'll let you explain it all to her. She's smart and damn lucky to have made it this far. But she's your responsibility. Agreed, Eugenie?
Fine with me, Harold. By the way, I found some notes in what was left of her pack. Her name's Abigayle. Abigayle Singh.
The end of the beginning. October 23rd, 2102. Early in the morning outside the huge metal door of Vault 76, a breeze blew across the concrete mezzanine, scattering leaves and old papers. A small mutated squirrel scampered across and onto one of the old benches, resting on its hind legs, sniffing the air. A loud clanking sound suddenly startled the animal, sending it scurrying back into the trees. The sound grew louder and the mighty vault door suddenly began to open. It took several minutes for the door to settle into its cradle, exposing Vault 76 to the outside world for the first time in 25 years. A woman, gray hair pulled into a ponytail with glasses, wearing the uniform of the Vault Overseer, stepped through the opening and out of the vault. She looked to the sky and then out to the horizon in all directions, taking a deep breath. She looked down at her Pip-Boy, then to the stairs, and takes the first steps into a new future. Thank you for joining us for our final episode of The Last Days of Appalachia. Telling the stories of the factions and characters of Fallout 76 has been both an honor and a privilege. If you've enjoyed this content, please subscribe, and better yet, please leave a review to help others find us. You can also follow us on Twitter at Modus Files for more information about this miniseries and our main podcast, The Modus Files. I'd like to thank our cast, Mandy Marie B. as Abigayle Singh, Austin Rogers as The Last Fire Breather, Fire Rider as Eugenie, and introducing Penal Pineapple as Harold. We'd also like to thank Harry Skingle for providing the cover art for this miniseries. And a shout out to the Apocalyptic Aristocracy Discord, home to a great group of fellow creators, the Robots Radio podcast community and the rest of the Robots Radio Rocket Club, and Jeremiah Johnson, our favorite character artist who provided the wonderful character artwork you can find on our website. Lastly, thank you to all of our subscribers and supporters. There are many more stories to be told, and we'll see you for our next Modus Files episode, Homecoming, Part 2.